Ladies, gentlemen, citizens of Krypton, alright, I am very proud to announce we have hit a new personal best in Rapid on Chess.com. 2601, baby! Becoming only the 11th Untitled player ever at Chess.com to hit that milestone, alright? It's one I'm very proud of. It does come with a grain of salt, right, that rapid chess amongst the higher level players isn't that popular, so when I see the global rank of 124th in the world, I automatically know I'm not the 124th best rapid player in the world, because there's 2,000 grandmasters are alive and active, not to mention numerous FIDE masters and international masters. It's just not a very popular time control at the top of the tripalium for a multitude of reasons. You want to be able to play more games faster, there's a lot of cheaters in that area, you know, the list goes on, but nonetheless, it's an impressive accomplishment, one that hasn't happened too often, and so I thought I would make a video detailing how I was able to reach that milestone. Alright, I've pulled up 3 games here. For the last game, I have the actual game that got me to 2600, but I wanted to go into a couple of the other games that I played leading up to that journey and the conclusion of reaching 2600, how I got there, my mentality, my thought process, you know, that kind of thing. So to start it off, I'm going to analyze a game I played against Grandmaster Alex Rustemov, who has a 2644 rapid rating, I believe good for about 80th in the world on the chess.com rankings. He became a Grandmaster in 1998. I was born in 1999, so automatically, you know, this guy's been a Grandmaster literally longer than I have been on planet Earth. And to set the context of this game, this was the 6th game that we had played. He had beaten me 5 times in a row previously. Alright, this is a while ago. My rapid rating is currently at 2460. He opens with the queen's pawn opening. I respond with d5. He plays c4, so I go e6. And I'm a little tentative about playing e6 because I'm always worried about my light square bishop and how to develop it in a position as I go down the game. But nonetheless, I wasn't overly concerned with it based off the games we had been playing. I just needed to get out of the opening into a fighting position. My opening play has never been the center of my game. I think a lot of players are different around my rating level in that regard. They understand centralized ideas around openings, and ever since I was little, I've never really enjoyed learning opening theory. I'm doing a better job of it now that I'm older, but it is still not my central game plan or idea to automatically know what I'm doing out of every opening necessarily. I prefer to just critically think my way out of positions. Of course, this does lead to massive time expenditure and sometimes just being in straight up bad positions. Alright, this is why I wanted to go through this game and a couple others just to show once again why or how I was able to get the rating I was able to get. So I castle my king nice and early. I get a very safe and solid setup in the center of the chessboard. Not too much is going on immediately. He plays queen to c2, getting his queen and his rook on the semi-open c-file in preparation for capturing on d5. I see all this coming. I play pawn to h6, just kicking the bishop back. He retreats. And now I play the move pawn to a6. I'm getting all of my pawns on light squares here, which I feel is fine for the position. I don't want to allow any pieces to b5 should a capture occur on d5, so that's why I play pawn to a6 prematurely. Once again, the only real problem in this position, the reason white is ever so slightly better, is because my light square bishop is now considered a bad bishop because it's on the same color as these pawns, and it's not easy to maneuver into the game. He captures on d5. I capture back with the knight. Probably not the best move, but I wanted to try and exchange pieces off early in the opening, and he knew what I was doing, so he retreated with the blatant purpose of just keeping pieces on the board, which allows for more possibilities, which means there's more ways one side can go wrong, and as he is already proven to be the stronger player here, being up 5-0 in the match currently, there's nothing wrong with that. I decide to activate my queen to the queen side of the board and start pushing for queenside space with b5. I also want to activate this light square bishop as I'm still overly concerned with the activity of that, right? My dark square bishop isn't doing anything in the position, but if something ever arises, it can hop to either the queen side or king side in one move. This knight on d7 looks inactive at the moment, but it can hop to f6. It's also guarding and keeping an eye on e5, so at least it's serving a defensive purpose. This light square bishop is not serving any purpose in the position. It's just blocking my 2 rooks. So I play b5 in part to create a square for the bishop. I play pawn to c5, just trying to expand for more space in the center. If he gets the move pawn to e4, I'm very, very concerned with the central control he'll get. If I go bishop to b7 immediately, for example, I was worried about pawn to e4, and then white just grabs control of the center. This comes a little too quickly in the position, however, but I wasn't sure about that at the current point in time. Black can just go knight takes c3, and if you capture back with queen takes c3, then after queen takes c3, rook takes c3, you have the move pawn to c5, and you're blowing up white's center anyway. e4 is going to become a big target, and white's pieces are pretty inactive. But obviously I didn't see all this back then. So after the move pawn to c5, he decides to castle, and that allows me to claim more space on the queen side, which I properly do. I play the move pawn to c4, and I have no doubt in my mind that he was anticipating this move because he very readily played the move bishop to h7. You notice the time situation here. I've used 7 minutes or 2 minutes of my clock, and I only have 7 minutes 48 left on the ticker. He has 8:03 left. King to h8, my only legal move, the easiest decision of the game for me. And now he activates his knight to e5, and basically what he's daring me to do here is play the move pawn to g6 and try to trap his light square bishop. The reason I don't go for this is because if I play pawn to g6, which he again is daring me to do, knight takes d5, e takes d5, and after knight takes g6, pawn takes g6, queen takes g6, my queen is on the wrong side of the board. I didn't have to calculate everything out to understand that because he has more material over here on my undefended king, that I wouldn't be able to survive this position, right? It's something I wanted to avoid and just keep the pieces standard as they were, so I voted pawn to g6. After knight to e5, I exchange one set of knights off the board, and now here I get a little tentative. I could have played the move pawn to f6, which I know Grandmaster Feingold would be absolutely appalled with, right? But it kicks the dark square bishop out of the chessboard. Instead, I decide to play bishop to b7, finally developing my light square bishop because I see this open diagonal h1 a8. It doesn't actually do that much for me in the position though. Knight takes d5, and now bishop takes d5, centralizing my bishop. There's the move pawn to e4 in the future, so the bishop's activity could be a little dulled. Rustemov sees this and plays bishop back to e4. I retreat my queen back to d8 as I realize there's no future for her over on the queen side of the chessboard. She's done all she can to help these pawns claim space, so it's time to reroute her over to the king side if the defensive need arises in the position. I have the opportunity to trade queen or trade on e4 and offer the exchange of queens with queen to d5, but I didn't like this as much as playing the immediate move pawn to f5. I was trying to grab every single square I could within the white camp, and I wasn't sure what it would lead up to, but I need squares in order to be able to fight back. What this match had taught me, the previous 5 games had taught me, is that if I don't claim the squares I'm able to claim, and I have to be careful about claiming them, I don't want to allow too many weaknesses on my side of the board, then I would eventually get overrun. So a space or being worried about space isn't something I was normally concerned with. At least it didn't take that big of a priority in my mind's eye when I was at this level of rapid chess. But thanks to this match and me basically getting stomped every game, it forced me to adapt, so I'm doing a much better job of claiming squares on the white side of the board, and my moves reflect that. After pawn to f3, now we have a dark square bishop and 2 rooks on the board per side to go along with the queens. It's still a very equal and imbalanced position, but black has a little more space here, and I recognize that I was probably the one pushing on at this point. I offer to exchange a set of bishops, and he plays the move pawn to e4, going for an immediate central break, and I play the move queen to d7, a slight error and slight miscue. I had to capture on e4 first and create a target and weakness of that e4 pawn. After queen to d7, the position is more or less equal. Pawn to d5 comes into the position, and now I'm a little worried about him having a potential win condition on the chessboard, but with 2 rooks and a queen on the chessboard, a lone pawn is not going to be enough to get the job done. So I exchange once on e4, seeing if he'll open up the f file. He doesn't. I capture on d5, and he wants to keep the queens on the board here. He's up 5-0 in the match, clearly wants to win again. So after rook takes d5, I play the move queen to a7, making use of this previous pawn to f3 move and the fact that the diagonal against the king is open. He plays king to f1, trying to avoid back rank weaknesses on his side of the chessboard. And this is where things start getting a wee bit hairy for white. I retreat the rook back to f8, trying to realign my rooks along the 8th rank with rook to e8, basically daring him to play rook to e1 and saying, I'll trade off 2 rooks for a queen if you try that. And he plays rook to e5 instead, trying to shut down my idea of rook to e8. I play the move r8 to d8, activating my last and final piece in the position, threatening the very blatant rook to d2 with the queen on f2 for checkmate. He plays rook to e1, going for Alekhine's gun, having 19 points of material lined up on the e-file, but since there's no target on the e-file, its effectiveness is limited, right? It still controls the e-file very effectively, and rook to e7 can come crashing down to position like a sledgehammer, but rook to d2 is just a wee bit faster in the position, and now I think he underestimated ever so slightly just how fast rook to d2 came in the position, because now he's forced into a potential draw by repetition. Rook to e2, and now after rook to d1, rook is forced back to e1. You don't want to let b2 fall, so at this point, after rook to e2 again, I have the choice of repeating moves 3 times, threefold repetition in chess, which would force a draw. Now, the context of this situation is that, once again, this is the 6th game we've played. I'm down 5-0 in the match. He's a grandmaster, literally longer than I've been alive, and I'm streaming this match live on TikTok and on Twitch in front of hundreds of people. And at this point, everyone in my chat was screaming at me to take the draw, right? And this is why I showed this game, right, with the context that I'm giving it. I was down 5-0 in the match. I've been getting beat up over a long span of time against this guy. He's a grandmaster, a very well-known, very strong grandmaster, and he's one of the top rapid players in the world. A draw here would be considered a good situation, but also you got to flip it, right? He's up 5-0 in a match against me. Clearly, he has no reason to fear me. So if he's going for a draw, that must mean he fears the position enough to where he's okay with settling for a draw. And that must mean I have to play on and try and get a win. So I ignore the draw threefold repetition. Play rook to d3, eyeing the f3 square. Maybe I can maneuver my pieces into the position. He plays rook to e7, activating his rook along the 7th rank, eyeing g7 as well as my a7 queen. And now I play the one mistake and one miscue of the game. I play queen to b8, which would allow white to jump into the position with queen to g6, and I had prepared rook to g8 to defend against this, but then you have the really sneaky rook sack, rook takes g7, a gorgeous rook sacrifice, forcing black to take on g7, and now after rook to e8, you're going to pick up the black queen for 2 rooks. Now, it's better for white because the king on h8 has no protection. Usually 2 rooks are superior to a queen, but in games where the king has no pawns to protect him, the queen will be able to endlessly harass the king, and it can never be anything worse than a draw. Usually she's able to harass the king, pick up pawns, go back to harassing him, and you can only ever play defense. It's very hard to see in game, and instead we got queen to e5, seeking to shut down h2 and the attack on h2 and threaten mate on g7 at the same time. But now I have the move rook to e1 or rook to d1 check, and after the move king to f2, I lift my queen to b6 first, and now you have to block with your own queen. You don't want to allow king to g3 and just start running ramp in the position. The king is forced out of the back rank, and now I have queen to f6, and all of a sudden black is once again on the offensive here. I'm staring at b2, I'm threatening queen to h4, and my king on h8 is safer than the white king on f2. I've proven that my king on h8 is safer than the king on f2 because the rook is now keeping the king out of all the first rank squares, and in this very, very critical position, my opponent finally blunders with the move pawn to g3. They were worried about queen to h4 coming into the position. At this point, it's 10-minute rapid with 0-second increment, and time pressure is going to become a problem. So after the very innocent-looking move pawn to g3 to keep my queen out of h4, my opponent realized they were on the defensive, finally had to react, and that's when you can see your opponent start to crack, and you have to be willing to pounce on it when it happens. Rook to d3, immediately going after the weakness created by the pawn push on g3, and now after the queen goes to e4, I play the move rook takes f3, and this is very, very important, right? I have been in good situations against really strong players before, and it's very tempting to say, okay, I'm up a pawn or I'm up material, I'm just in a position that I know is better, right? You don't actually know because you don't have analysis bar, evaluation bar next to you, but you know, like in this situation, black is just up a pawn. You know you're better. It's very tempting to just sit back and assume the position is going to take care of itself and you're going to win. But you have to be like a shark in the water, right? You have to circle the position. You have to knock these guys out while you have the opportunity. They're at these ratings they're at because if they're given a chance to breathe, if they're given an opportunity to come back and survive the position, they will. You have to knock them out while you have the opportunity. So I take my time here. I look at his weakened king. I don't retreat my pieces. I don't start pushing pawns on the queen side. I instead play the move rook to e3, offering to sacrifice a rook on the position. And the idea is if you capture this rook with either the queen or your rook, it's mate in one on the chessboard with queen to f1, a gorgeous rook sacrifice in the position. And if you were to play what he did in the game, queen to f4, and now the rook is under attack, so if I captured, you take, and black is up 2 pawns in the endgame, but once again, when you have them in a bad position, you have to make the most of it, and I find the move queen to c6 check, sidestepping the queen exchange, and now I'm threatening to capture Her Majesty on f4, and now the position is just a done deal. I make sure to capture on f4 first with the rook, he takes back on f4, and now after queen to f3, the king is forced to g1, and there is no way of stopping checkmate. A funny move, rook takes g7, but after rook to e1, we don't even need to pick up the rook, and we get the George W. Again, the context of the situation, right? He had already beaten me down 5 times in a row. It's not like we were going back and forth. This was an upset win, to be sure, but I hope that win provided some of the mentality that goes through my head whenever I'm playing these games, alright? And then the second game I have is me with the white pieces against a fellow 2500 Untitled Rapid player, alright? And this game, I want to show, like, again, I'm not a very strong opening player. Openings have never been a big part of my game. Ever since I was little, I enjoyed the part of chess that allowed me to be creative, think of new ways and new solutions of coming up to solve positions, but I'd never really enjoyed learning opening theory. Now that I'm older, I have more of an appreciation for it, but I'm still not a very deep theoretical player. I prefer to make the most out of my position just by looking at it, maneuvering my pieces to the squares I think they should go, and trying to get the most out of it. I don't necessarily go for wins straight out of the opening, and it is still something I'm working on, because especially in faster time controls I'm learning. I got my rapid up to 2600, and I just peaked with a new personal best in Blitz at 2700, but I've always been a much better quick speed player than I have in rapid. I only started playing rapid about a year and a half ago when I started streaming on TikTok, because it gave me enough time to read comments, explain my moves to viewers, and still interact with everyone during the game and not have to worry about the clock like Blitz. So we get a very, very standard opening out of this game. All right, after rook to e1, pawn to b5, bishop to b3, knight to a5, knight to f1, knight takes b3, pawn takes on b3, castles. I have this knight on f1 just like you would in a standard Roy Lopez position, pretending to or intending to reroute it over to g3 and maybe the f5 square. My opponent has already captured one of my bishops in exchange for the knight, but I'm not that concerned with it. Bishop to g5 didn't make, or bishop to g4 didn't make sense to me, because you just bothered to get the bishop pair and now you're going to get rid of it. He wanted to play for pressure and potential tactics down the f-file. I understood that. I just didn't agree with it. A very important part of chess is to acknowledge your opponent's plans. You have to be aware of them, right? Because sometimes they might work, sometimes you might have to react to them, but you always have to do your best to approach them with skepticism. Look for ways of denying your opponent's ideas or saying, what you're doing isn't that great. So I ignore his plans completely. I get my knight on f1 and reroute it over to f5 in 2 moves. All is well in the position. And now after pawn to h6 here, I play the move bishop to h4, and once again, I think this is a big reason why my rapid rating is where it's at. He plays the move queen to d7, and my spidey senses start tingling in this position. I know there's something off in this position because of the looseness of the position of his pieces. My knight on f5 hitting squares inside of his position, and it leads me to find the move knight takes e5. After knight takes e5, if you were to capture this pawn and play pawn takes e5, then I have queen takes d7, knight takes d7, and at the end of the line, knight takes e7, and white is just in the endgame up an extra pawn and should go on to win. with a nice advantage. So instead, he tries to deny my idea, and if you take on d1 with the bishop, I can capture your queen. You take with the knight, but I take, and you're actually down a solid minor piece in this line with black. So I play a move my opponent just did not see coming whatsoever, and after the move queen takes f5, I play the move pawn takes f5, bishop takes d1, and now I play the move knight to c6. I'm currently down a minor piece, but both of these bishops are under attack. You only get one move in chess. They're on two different color squares. Do the math on it. You're losing one of them. After bishop takes on c2, I play the move knight takes e7, king to h7, and now I play rac1 in an attempt to activate my rook. Instead of lying back and getting defensive, I seek activity and prioritize that even over trying to retain material. I don't really care about my extra pawn advantage. The endgame has been one of my favorite parts of the chess ever since I was little, and it's so often because once you cross like the 2000 rating level, you get in your head, and even before that, but especially after that, games can be decided by just being up one extra pawn, so players really get married to the idea of material in the end game. But a lot of it has to do with the activity of your pieces, and that's going to be more of a deciding factor more often than not than straight up material will be. After the very innocent looking move bishop to c4 in this position, it's a blunder that allows me to win the game, and a big part of the end game that players, in my opinion, that aren't like titled don't give enough credit to, right? A lot of title players, they've been through it because they played a lot of classical chess, so they've seen it firsthand. They understand how tricky the end game is, but the common chess player doesn't give enough respect for how many tactics, tricks, and traps lie in the end game. And it starts with getting your pieces to prime position, my rook on the open file, my bishop chipping in to hit the dark square knight on f6, and my rook on the 7th rank of the chessboard, all combines for me to play this gorgeous sequence, starting with bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, and then knight to d5. Oh my days, all right? Knight to d5, a gorgeous move in the end game, and it doesn't hang a knight immediately, because if you were to take this knight, which the ops ended up doing, then I can just capture the rook on e8. I initially dismissed this idea, and this is something I've had to learn, and this is a big part of why my rating has gone up. I dismissed knight to d5 when I saw it, because I saw the move rook to f8, just retreating and defending everything. And a big part of why my rating has gone up is because I've asked myself questions instead of just making assumptions. Oh, my opponent has a response, it's no good. I ask myself, okay, he can go rook to f8, and the reason that works is because it defends the rook. Do I have anything after that? And then you go through the most forcing line, so you play rook takes e8, rook takes e8, right, because you don't want to be down a rook. And then you find that you have knight to f6, forking the king and the rook. And once I saw this, I was like, okay, now it's just money. And the ops saw this too, so they played after knight to d5, bishop takes d5, going down the exchange. And it's, once again, very important that you don't let up. You don't let your concentration levels go downward when you know you're in a winning position. Once again, I'm up the exchange. It's a very simplified in-game. I should theoretically be very winning here, but you still have to get the job done. You have to make sure you're at full concentration level, especially when you're in a winning position, because that's when it's easiest to go wrong. Line both of my rooks up on the 7th rank, pressuring the g7 square, immobilizing his own rook, and then after pawn to g3, making sure he can't take on g2. I'm very, very slow and methodical about playing this position on. I force his rook to the g4 square, and then I just start going pawn by pawn after the position, making sure once again that I'm keeping his rook pinned to the g7 square. He has no moves to go to, so he eventually starts pushing his pawns, and now I start picking up the pawns again, one by one. His rook tries to flee, go right back to pinning it on g7, and if the g7 pawn ever falls, the two rooks will be able to checkmate the black king. My opponent knows this. That's why he has to keep his rook there. And now after rook to e5, again, I'm only taking what he gives me. He has to make moves in order to keep the position going, but every single move he makes creates another weakness in the chessboard that allows me to take advantage of it. I only have a minute 2 on the ticker here, but I trust myself in the clutch. I know how to play quick chess, and I don't do my best to not worry about the clock, just worry about making the best move. In this position, my opponent's forced to resign as I just walk the king up the board, nice and easy. All right, and that game was played, I believe, about a month before I hit 2600. And now I'll get to the final game. This was when I was 2596. I had previously, this was my second attempt to get to 2600. I had been at 2591 and was playing a game worth 9 rating points if I won. That would have gotten me to 2600. So this is my second attempt. I had gotten to 2596, and for context, when you play Rapid at this level, there's 2700 and 2800 rated Rapid players, but they don't search up 10-minute games in the rated pool. They play in closed tournament events like the Pro Chess League or the Esports League, these closed events, and so their ratings are really only garnered by playing against each other. There's no real opportunity to play against other Rapid players who are highly rated. There's few here and there, but it's a real grind once you pass even 2500, because every game you're playing, you're going to gain like 5 rating points. If you lose 13. For this game, for example, I'm playing against a 2458 Rapid player, which is, I believe, top 1000 in the world for Rapid, probably a little higher. And if I win this game, I gain 5 rating points. If I draw, I lose 3. And if I lose 13. So lots on the line here. I go to my tried and true, my favorite opening, the Alekhines defense. I've been playing it even in classical chess ever since I was little. Pawn to e5, knight to d5, pawn to d4, pawn to d6, very standard. You have a lot of options here. You can go bishop g4, g6. I decide to go g6, keep it standard, pawn to h3, bishop to g7, bishop to e2 here. And now I castle. Already, I thought bishop to e2 is a bit passive, and after he castled again, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do here, and I'm not sure what the best move is, but I do know that it's going to be a nerve-wracking game. Everyone's watching me. I'm doing this live on stream. Everyone knows what's at stake here. It's important to me to play the kind of chess that I enjoy playing, right? Because otherwise, if I let the nerves and everything get to me, I'm not going to be able to play the kind of game I want to play, and I'm going to come undone in the end. The psychological part of chess is something that isn't talked about nearly enough, and it plays a factor, in my opinion, even at the highest levels of the game. You see it time and time again, but it really doesn't get talked about enough. Here, I capture back on d4, already trying to get too cute. And this is a very important game. I think this game showed why I was able to get to 2600 Rapid the way I was, because it wasn't the most accurate game by any stretch of the imagination, and I was just straight up much worse for the majority of it. But I stayed with it. I fight on even in a worse position. And after knight to d7, c5, a gorgeous move to kick my pieces back, I realized I was probably much worse in this position, but I thought knight takes d4 was kind of letting me off the hook a little easy. Knight takes c5 allows d6 to hopefully get traded off, but then my opponent showcased why they're at the rating they're at. Instead of recapturing on d6 while I'm temporarily up a pawn, they play the move knight 1 to c3, since both knights are on the b file. Chess notation is weird sometimes. They don't capture this pawn on d6 immediately. Instead, they decide to hold back and wait off on the material recapture in the position. And they go for activity instead, because they understand when it comes to having an isolated pawn, what dictates if a pawn is weak or strong is who controls the square in front of the pawn. With knight 1 to c3, white is always going to be able to control the square in front of the pawn, and with bishop f3 to come later, this pawn is going to be in a weakness that I'm going to have to deal with until white decides to capture it. So I play the move pawn to b6, and this is already a very uncomfortable position for me. I was just trying to reinforce the c5 knight, create a diagonal square for my light square bishop in the position, and after bishop to f3, I realized that if I play the move bishop to b7, knight takes d7 is coming, and now you're threatening the bishop, you're threatening my knight, you're threatening the knight on c6. It's just very, very unpleasant, right? So I do not want to have to deal with all this, especially since I've already burnt a lot of my time. I'm down to 556 on only move 15 of the chess game. It's not looking great, so I decide to give back the temporary extra pawn that he gave me in an effort to keep his knight out of d6. I correctly guessed that he would have to capture back with the bishop, and now I have bishop to b7 because knight to d6 is no longer possible. And my opponent misses something here, and this is a critical. He plays the move bishop to f4 in order to try and play knight to d6. But sometimes when there's a chess move that you really want to play, if you know you have the superior position, if your opponent is a strong op, they will make moves to prevent you from playing the moves you want to play. But if they're in a worse position, oftentimes you're able to play those moves anyway because of the strengths of your position and the weaknesses of your opponents. knight to d6 is playable here, threatening the bishop on b7 and the pawn on f7, and if black were to capture the seemingly free knight, bishop takes f7, wins the queen and the game on the spot. So an important moment there about the strength of your position. And after bishop to f4, knight to b4 allows me just enough time to equalize and get the bishops off the board. Now I make a egregious error, and again, we see this is not my greatest game whatsoever. Blunder after blunder, miscue after miscue, nerves are clearly playing a factor here. Queen takes d1 was much, much stronger, right? This queen is misplaced on the chessboard, and I thought because of my knights that I would control enough of the squares around the queen to where she couldn't activate, and I just missed queen to b3 because my knight's on b7 now, and he actually had, after queen to f3, you can target this knight, you get the rook out with tempo, and black's position is going to be all but lost. I'm going to have to give up significant material. He plays queen to b3 here, and I correctly find knight to d3. I think he wanted rook to d1 in order to create a pin, and now I'm faced with a very interesting decision. I could sacrifice the queen. I have 5 minutes left on the clock. I've been getting outplayed all game. My position has been just straight up worse. I've been trying to fight for equality, just not to be down on material, right? I sense the pressure in the position, but I also know if I capture this bishop on f4, you take back my queen on d8, I take back with the rook, and I've captured 8 points of material in exchange for 9. Right, a knight and a bishop, 8 for a queen, 9, and it's clearly not going to be a winning position for black. However, my opponent has a clear idea and a clear mindset of what he wants to do in the position. He's activated all of his pieces to the queen side of the board, he's putting pressure on d1, and he's going to try and poke holes on d6, c7, and try and create pressure, maybe capture the queen side pawns. It's a very easy game for him to follow. And so, with everything on the line, everyone watching me, the potential to drop back to 25-80 and have to play 3 more hours even for another chance to get back up to where I'm at, I decide I'm going to capture on f4 because it's an interesting imbalance, and if I were playing a nothing chess game, I would definitely do this just because I enjoy playing in these imbalanced rare positions where you might not be better, but because it's a unique position, the state of the game has changed. What moves were good for your opponent, he has to find a new set of moves. In the vacuum of a chess game, when you only have a limited amount of time, this can be very tricky to deal with. So I play knight takes f4, rook takes d8, rook takes d8. And now my opponent starts going a little bit wrong in the position, knight to e4, and I start seeing this. I'm like, okay, I think he needs to start playing against my pieces and the inactivity on my c file and the a and b pawns over here. Knight to e4 looks like a nice centralizing move, but I just move my knight back. Rook to c1, he tries to activate, but now it's too late because I'm able to exchange one set of knights. And right, when you're down on material, usually you want to keep as much material on the board as possible, keep the game as complicated as possible if you know you're worse, because it gives a greater chance for your opponent to go wrong and something to go right for you. But also, you have to make sure you trade off good pieces, or if you're the side with less material, you still want to trade off bad pieces for good pieces. Here, this knight on e4 dominating my position, controlling key squares on the queen and king side of the board, and overall just a hazard in everything I'm trying to accomplish. My knight on b7 was virtually dormant, accomplishing nothing in the position, so I'm able to trade off a bad knight for a good knight, and this knight on c5 blockades everything. Now, one of the most important parts of chess when you're starting out that you have to learn is that chess is a conversation between two people, more so than anything else in the world, right? Which means so often when you're having a conversation, people are simply just waiting for their turn to talk instead of actively listening to what the other person is saying with their moves. So after queen to c2, my opponent has 14 points of material lined up on the c file, and clearly he doesn't want to just sacrifice his queen for a knight. So I play the move rook to d7 because I understand what my opponent's next move is 1000% going to be. He plays the move pawn to b4, which in my eyes was a bit of a miscue. I play the move knight to d3, and now he wants to invade my position and just start gobbling everything up. So he plays the hurried queen to c6 here. And I saw queen to d6 coming. I was able to activate my rooks, and this was the initial position I wanted and the whole reason I played rook to d7. I knew it wasn't probably the most accurate move, but because of I saw the sequence pawn to b4 and queen to c6, basically knowing that's what my opponent wanted, I was able to get away with this setup, and now all of my pieces are protected, synchronized, and centralized. And this is important because now all of a sudden there are threats in White's camp. But because my pieces are already protected, set up to go, if he doesn't defend against these threats with a simple rook to b1, and instead seeks to punch back, right, because he looks like he's the aggressor, he has more material, he's on my side of the board, this rook on d7 looks weak, he plays the blunder rook to d1. And this move allows me to have a winning position immediately because he was looking at knight takes b4, after which you sacrifice the queen for 2 rooks, and White is winning in a rook versus bishop endgame with a knight per side, but up the exchange White will win. However, I don't go after the pawn on b4. I instead play the move knight to e5. And rook to d1 is a callous mistake, to be sure, but I think it's only a mistake that happens if I play this queen sacrifice and change the course of the game, change how the game was going to go, right? And this queen sacrifice all the way back here cues up this move knight to e5, obviously something that I didn't know I was going to see, but I trust myself in these situations to be able to find a pathway out, right? Anyone can trust themselves if they see the light at the end of the tunnel. Becoming a chess player is about trusting yourself to find a way out of the tunnel even when there's no light in sight. You have to trust yourself to get it done even when there's no apparent way to get it done. After knight to e5, I'm now protecting the rook on d7 with my knight. So if you exchange, which he ended up doing, I now capture on c6, and I'm protecting the rook on d8 with my knight. If you were to take with the queen, it's the same thing. I can just exchange with my rook, and the knight is protecting the rook. So instead, he decided, you can move your queen out of the way as well, like queen to c2, but after rook takes on d1, now black has so much extra firepower in exchange for the queen. His pathway to victory becomes very, very simplistic. You just play rook to d2, you start targeting all the pawns in the second rank, and black's going to easily overrun white in this game. So for the sake of complication, my opponent clearly also knew what was on the line. They decide to play on, don't resign, and play the move rook takes d8. And now they're down an extra minor piece in the endgame. And once again, it's very, very important to me that I don't get ahead of myself. I don't jump in the air. I'm not like, oh, this is winning, let's go, I'm right there, I'm right there. You just play it one move at a time, all right? You look and see what new grandmasters call it taking stock of the position, what new weaknesses and strengths exist in the new state of the position, right? Now it's 5 pawns versus 4. I decide I'm going to start targeting these queenside pawns because if I get them off the board and it's 3v3 with me having an extra piece, it's going to be theoretically winning. So I decide to make that my next step in the position, centralizing my bishop, locking his pawns on dark squares, and my opponent sees what I'm doing, so he decides to exchange these 2 pawns for the one on the B file, so that way I can't push down past B pawn. I accept this because once again I just wanted 3v3, which I know is theoretically winning, and now with 2 minutes left on the ticker here, it's very important that I don't get ahead of myself, continue playing patiently, force his knight backwards as I bring my pieces upward. King to e6, and now after pawn to h4, I once again offer the exchange of pieces. The simplest way of winning a game when you're up in material is just by converting pieces of equal material value. You can also seek to shut down your opponent's counterplay, which is what I was doing because I knew he wouldn't accept the trade of material. So after king to d5, now I have my knight centralized on e4, keeping his knight at bay on d2. King to g2, I start rerouting my bishop, and now after bishop to b4, this knight on d2 actually has no squares it can go to where it can't be captured except b1. And after it goes to b1, now this dark square bishop dominates every square this knight can go to, right? Every square a3, c3, or d2, the bishop can capture it, and this dark square bishop keeps the white king from going to e1, and my knight prevents it from going to e2. So now all I have to do is start walking my king into the queen side, preparing to capture the helpless knight. And my opponent, once again, to his credit, plays on valiantly to the last stone, to the last pawn. After king to d3, pawn to g4, we exchange on g4, and now I play the move king to c2 in preparation to pick up this horsey. My opponent starts getting his king into gear, saying, okay, I don't know if you can mate with a knight and a bishop, and if I ever have to checkmate with a knight and a bishop and they're holding my family hostage, Tell my fam I love them. Alright? They ain't coming home. So, after king takes b1, I still have to be very careful to save at least one of these pawns in order to secure the George W. I don't want to be left with only a knight and a bishop. I should have researched that and done my homework and know how to checkmate with that, but as someone who has played over 30,000 online games, I have encountered that scenario maybe twice, alright? Just not something that comes to my old age eye. And now after bishop to e1, trying to force something on h4, he goes after the knight. I capture on h4 with a minute left on the ticker. I have 2 pawns versus 1, and it's still very, very, very important that you take your time, because it is possible to blunder any situation, any scenario. You can play like Bobby Fischer or Magnus Carlsen for 54 moves straight, but if you make a mistake on move 55, you can end up giving up the win. After king to f5, right? You can force the pawn to a dark square, and now the king is going to get into g2 and h3. So I still had to be very careful here, but I knew it was theoretically winning. The bishop or the h-pawn, queen's on the wrong color square for the bishop. So if it's bishop and h-pawn versus lone king, it's a draw. So that means I just need to make sure I salvage my g-pawn. I play the move pawn to g5, and now after king to f2, I simply reroute my bishop to f4, and the ops resign, because now after king takes h6, all I have to do is waltz his majesty back to the king side, and no matter what you do, the capture on g4 is inevitable, and you're eventually going to waltz the king over to the f3 square, get the pawn over to queen on g1, and with a whole minute left as a 2800 bullet player, I am very confident I would be able to get a checkmate with a queen and a bishop. Alright, hopefully this video helped show you guys how I was able, or some of the reasons I was able to become a 2600 rated rapid player, the 11th ever Untitled in Chess.com history. Still a very cool accomplishment. Again, you have to take it with a grain of salt, alright? I play a time control that isn't very popular, especially amongst the top of the chess world. But hey, it's still a cool accomplishment. Cool accomplishments deserve to be celebrated, alright? Always take pride in what you do. And I'll go ahead and see you guys in the next one. Alright, chat? As always, thank you guys for stopping by. I appreciate the support. Make sure to follow the Twitch, General Zod Chess. And as always, to end the video, remember, believe in yourself. Alright? Not in the you that I believe in. Don't believe in me either. Alright? Believe in the you that believes in yourself. I'll see you all in the next one.